$12,498. Now, doesn't really matter what type of car you're talking about. That's not a heck of a lot of money to spend these days, especially when it comes to good old-fashioned A to B transportation. So it's time for us to do the wrap on the 2014 Mitsubishi Mirage that we've got here. And as we like to do on the road trip, we like to test the absolute base model car. And a lot of people probably are asking, well, why in the world would you want to test the base nothing option car? And let's just tell you what we mean when we mean no options. We mean no air conditioning. We mean free pedals. That's right. We mean manual transmissions. We mean plastic wheel covers. We mean everything that is as basic as you can get it, because that's how you actually determine whether or not any car is actually any good. It's nice to have the window dressing, but that's why this is the basic car to figure out from the core how well the Mitsubishi Mirage has performed. Now we're sitting at just under 4,800 kilometers on the odometer, so we've had some really good opportunities to test it. And most importantly, as you've probably seen on a previous video on the road trip, we've been testing it in nasty cold weather up here in Manitoba. So we've been actually experiencing in the realm of minus 40 degrees Celsius and even colder than that. So we're going to tell you everything that we've uncovered today in the drive with the Mitsubishi Mirage and how well it's actually performed. Most importantly, does it measure up to the fuel economy figures that we see here? And 5.9 for the city, 4.6 for the highway. How do you get it? Can you experience it in the winter time? Well, you'd be surprised as to how well we did, but we're going to tell you a little bit more about that today. Now, the other thing is whether or not it makes sense to take this car and go to the up-level models. So instead of the base ES that this one is, going to the SE for the Canadian market. I gotta tell you, there's something that I do like about the Mitsubishi Mirage, because, how do I put this nicely? This car isn't trying to be sexy. It is trying to be what it is meant to be, and that is a super mini slash city car. It is meant to fit in the smallest of parking spaces. It is meant to have a tight turning radius, and it is meant to, well, sip fuel. So it's not that it's doing anything wrong. The question is, what is happening to the super mini class? Because there's already going to be some very stiff competition from the likes of Nissan. Now, we've just received the announcement that the 2015 Nissan Micra is going to be coming to Canada. And most notable is that that car is going to have an MSRP of under $10,000, $9,998. So all of a sudden, you've got to start asking yourself, does this car make sense for the money? Should I wait for the Micra? Is a Micra with equipment going to cost so much more that this makes more sense? And there's also the factors of warranty to consider. And in Canada, Mitsubishi has definitely made a name for itself when it comes to their 10-year warranties. So we'll dig into that a little bit and also ask the question as to what else could be coming now that the Nissan Micra has opened up this cheap side of the market. Could it be the Volkswagen Up? Now, we've been told by Volkswagen that the Up is not slated for North America, but they've done some really shady things when it comes to getting us a little teased about it. And by that I mean that they brought it to the 2012 New York Auto Show. They had it for journalist drives, and it also won the World Car of the Year award in 2012. Not to mention the fact that there's some very interesting things that you need to know about the crash tests on the Up versus the other type of super mini cars that are on the market. So, as expected, as with any road trip, we're going to get into way too much detail today. But if you've got thoughts, feelings, or questions on anything automotive, whether it be super mini or maybe a little bit bigger, send an email to steelbeltedmind@gmail.com. Buckle up. It's time for the road trip. Well, we've been living with the Mirage 1.2 liter 3-cylinder over the last few months, and I have to tell you, There's a lot more to this three-banger than meets the eye, and I have to say that even calling it a three-banger isn't exactly fair, because this is definitely one of the smoother three-cylinder engines that you're going to run across. Dual overhead cam, 74 horsepower, 74 foot-pounds of torque, and that doesn't sound like a lot. But you have to remember that this particular Mirage, being the base model, not having AC or any other additional weighty things, is only weighing in at 895 kilograms. So the power to weight ratio for this setup is actually pretty good. Now, it has a 5-speed manual transmission. Now, the thing I noticed about this particular 5-speed that I like is that the gears are very tall. I mean, you can wind this thing up to about 5,000 RPM in first gear, and surprisingly, it doesn't really feel like you're killing it. It actually seems to like it. Not only that, it actually has what I would consider to be a fairly pleasing engine note for a three-cylinder engine. Actually sounds like it's got a little bit more going on. Now, the one thing that I did notice with the 5-speed manual, and maybe something that Mitsubishi needs to think about for any redesign or rejigs down the road, is that the 5-speed doesn't have a lockout for reverse. In fact, reverse is straight down from 5th gear, and yeah, a few times I thought it was a 6-speed manual, so it would be nice to maybe move that into the upper left quadrant of the shift pattern. Now, when you take a look underneath the hood, you're going to notice something that is starting to occur with a lot of inexpensive vehicles, and this is not just a Mitsubishi thing, this is just about everybody thing, and that has to do with the fact that they're not finishing things off when it comes to paint. I first saw this occurring on the Nissan Versa sedan. Is it really a big deal? Well, it's not like you're necessarily going to be taking a Mitsubishi Mirage to the car show and popping the hood to show off to people, so maybe it isn't. But there is something that we noticed in the winter that drove us a little bit batty, and that has to do with the way that the side panel here, the way that the fender meets up with the structure here. Now, I'll explain exactly what I mean, because what you've got here is your air inlet for the HVAC, and when it comes to winter, you want to keep this as clear as possible. That means, if you've got the car parked outside, that you're going to get the usual blanket of snow. So, being the reasonable person you are with a snow brush, you're going to pop the hood and you're going to start clearing things off. Well, guess where the snow goes? It basically dumps into the side, and it's kind of strange because we expect to see this closed off, and we've seen it closed off by so many makes that we're just simply wondering why that's the case. Now, I did notice around the strut towers that we do have good seam sealing, so that'll certainly help when it comes to reducing the amount of corrosion. Now, the one thing that needs to be pointed out, and that is that we're dealing with quite a bit of sound insulation, not just on the underside of the hood, but if you take a look at the back of the firewall, Mitsubishi has even put a little bit back there. So it's by no means a buzzy sound inside the cabin of the Mitsubishi Mirage. Now, this particular battery, I have to tell you, we didn't plug this thing in all winter long, and I'll tell you exactly why. The main reason is this particular vehicle didn't come to us with an engine block heater. I was concerned at first, but then I did a little bit of checking, and I was wondering why the vehicle was starting so well in the -30s and 40s. Well, it helps that it's a 0W20 factory fill oil, but here's the kicker. It's actually a full synthetic from the factory. And that is going to be the margin that you need to make sure that your vehicle is going to start in the winter, no matter what you drive. So, good news is we never got stranded, never got stuck, and actually had reasonably good economy. Now let's tell you about a few other things that I noticed with the Mitsubishi Mirage during the test. And Actually, I have to give them kudos when it comes to the headlamp assemblies. Not because it has these little aerodynamic-y looking type of fins here, but what I'm actually liking about them is these are some of the best low beam operation headlamps for a standard car that I've seen for quite a while. Now, these are the typical halogen style bulb. We haven't gotten into LEDs or anything like that yet. The only thing is that I found them to be a little wanting when it comes to high beam operation on the highway. Now, you'll notice below that you do have the plugs for upgrading to the fog lamps if that's something you wanted to do down the road. There's actually quite a bit of accessories available for the Mitsubishi Mirage, even in going as far as to actually putting additional cladding on it to somehow sportify it, but I think that's money best spent in other areas. Now, the other thing that I needed to point out as we move along the side of the vehicle here is that you do have the side repeaters, and when it comes to a Super Mini or a city car, you want to make sure that if you're making any form of movements that you're going to be seen. So I like this type of arrangement. That definitely works. Now, the rear tail lamp assemblies are the wraparound style, and typical incandescence, nothing really remarkable here, but definitely do have the proper positioning that I like to make sure that the car is seen. And there's also additional reflectors along the vehicle. Now, this particular one, obviously, it's a very tasteful blue, but you can get into some pretty wild colors when it comes to city cars. And I'm going to tell you why you want to think about that, because something like this, you kind of have to think about the color that you're going to get for the vehicle as the safety vest. So yeah, it may not be something that you're going to wear for pants, but it's something that makes a lot of sense to have on a city car. Now, on the road trip, you've certainly heard us talk quite a bit about making sure that you are wearing the proper shoes for winter on your vehicle. And we made sure that this particular Mitsubishi Mirage was equipped with winter tires. And you'd be surprised how well they actually work. Now, what we've got on this particular Mirage is the Pirelli Snow Control Winter 190 Series 3. Why Pirelli has to name their tires the way they do, I don't know. But let me just explain a little bit about what I do like about these tires. Now, it's actually quite good in respect to evacuating the snow and the water, especially from the center channels. These are some of the widest center channels that I've seen on winter tires. Now, the only thing that I did find is that I'd like to have a little bit more separation here with the shoulder blocks, because it certainly doesn't have the same bite when it comes to taking low-speed corners that I've experienced on other winter tires. But overall, they're definitely quite good for what they do. And I should mention that I was really impressed with how well they worked on ice. Now, the other thing that you need to remember is that we're dealing with actually a very small size of tire here. 165/65 R14s is what we're dealing with for size. And this comes back to what Mitsubishi is trying to do with the Mirage and make it certainly attractive to Canadians, is that your replacement costs for 14-inch tires, well, they're going to be quite inexpensive. So that's something to think about down the road, in addition to the fact that Mitsubishi is putting 10-year warranties on this Thailand-built Mirage. Okay, maybe it's just me and knowing way too much that I do about cars. There's just something about this inlet here that certainly has a fishy look to it, wouldn't you say? Almost 1958 Packard Hawk. But again, it's because I know way too much about cars. Here's something that is definitely interesting when it comes to the radio antenna. Look at the size of this thing. It's definitely one of the largest that we've ever seen. Oh, good, you can make it even higher. That's fantastic. It definitely bodes well for the raccoon tail market. It's certainly something that really hasn't been going strong for a few years. But what I do like when it comes to styling elements on the Mitsubishi Mirage is actually back here. Now, if you take a look at what they've done, and it's important to note that the Mirage has had plenty of aerodynamic sculpting throughout, trying to make this car as slippery as possible. Well, then you come to the back here, and it's important to note that we're dealing with the base car. The rear spoiler that you have here, this isn't an extra cost option. This is standard equipment. And notice how the aerodynamics have even gone as far as to making sure that the hinge points for the hatch here, they are about as slippery as you can make it. That's definitely well done. Now, the rear washer nozzle is actually housed up here. I did have some problems with it freezing at particular points through the winter, so definitely keep that in mind. Now, the hatch, and should also point out while we're doing this, is that the base level for Mirage, every door, every lever, it's all manual. There's no power locks at this particular trim level. But what is at this trim level is the cargo area cover. And that's a really nice piece to have. Now, unlike some other makes that actually use a tether at both sides, they've just used the one. And well, it definitely does the job. So let's get that out of the way. And actually, this was something that I noticed that some of the other manufacturers haven't done. Now, they've been using this type of glorified egg crate material, but a lot of them don't do this. A lot of them don't actually give you this additional strengthened piece here that clamps on it. So when you're going to be putting it onto the pins on the inside, that you actually feel like you did something, because there's actually a tension clamp there. So that's a nice piece to have. When we take a look at the finishing here, this is very important. So many vehicles miss this, and it's nice to have the pull down here to make sure that you're not going to have to put your hands on the outside and get yourself all messed up with winter grime when you're closing the hatch. The finishing all the way around is actually quite good. There's good seam sealer, not just on the points of the hatch here, but also on the bottom of the doors. Why is that important? You want to make sure that you don't have water going into your seams, because that's where corrosion likes to start. Isn't that right, Ford? Now, let's take a look inside and show you a little bit about the way that the cargo area is set up. Now, what I do like here is that you've actually got quite a deep well, even with the rear seats up. Now, it's not exactly what I would call cavernous when it comes to space, but it's very decent. Now, when we take out the cargo area cover, you know what? I'd almost want to go down to Home Depot and get myself a little thicker piece of MDF to actually give it a little bit more support, depending on what you're putting in there. Now, when you take a look inside, you'll notice that we have the temporary style of spare tire. The jack is in the most unique location. It's actually located under the front driver's seat. So if you don't have a lot of room, that's maybe what you need to think about. But your tools are located back here. And this is actually something that I wanted to point out, and make sure that you don't jam things into this well. And don't worry, we'll cut away to B-roll for this, my fine shooter of stuff. There's actually the fresh air exhaust in the rear here, in the spare tire well, so make sure that you don't block that off, otherwise things will get funky inside. Now, you'll notice that I actually took the rear headrests off of this particular Mirage. Now, that's just a personal thing that I like to do. I like to have as much rearward vision, but I always put them back in when I've got passengers there. And I should point out that even when you do put them back in, you'd be surprised at how good the vision is, even with these in place. Because that's something that I found with a lot of cars in the class, is that once you've got those headrests up, you're not really seeing a lot out the back unless you've got a backup camera. Now, the question for anyone who's going to be looking at a hatch is, can I do a lot of hauling with it? Well, we're going to show you exactly how much space is in here once you put the seat backs down. And it is a 65-35-ish type of setup here, and I don't have my tape measure handy, but one thing I wanted to point out before we do that is I think Mitsubishi wants to think about a little tougher type of cover on the back of the bottom of the hatch here. It's well, something tumbling around is going to go into that and probably take it out if it's rolling around good enough. Now, what you have to do to fold down the rear seats is you got to know where to release them. And I have to admit, I'd like to see Mitsubishi do something more along the lines of a pull top on the top of these. Now, I'll explain why, because what we've got here, it's just a simple type of strap to release the seat backs. Now, once you've got them released, the one thing that you'll notice is that you have a little bit of an incline on the inside, but it's by no means what I would call too ski jumpy for this class of car. The only thing that I did notice about these particular seat backs is as you actually start feeling around on them, because that's what we do on the road trip, they're not particularly, as you can see, backed, I guess is the best way to explain it. It almost feels as though, oh, it almost feels like there's a bunny in there. It just needs to have a little bit more of a robust type of covering. So that's something that Mitsubishi may want to think about, could possibly improve upon. Now, the issue that I came across with these particular seats is, well, here, let's just put them back and then you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. You want to make sure that you've got the seat belts over when you're putting the seat back up. Otherwise, you're going to jam them in there quite easily. But there is the ability to plug the seat belts into the side here so that you can get them out of the way if needed, depending on what you're hauling. So now the seat belt's out of the way. As you can see, there's no fold-down center armrest with this particular setup. What I thought was unique, though, was the fact that the seat belts tuck out of the way with the Mitsubishi Mirage back seat. You're going to notice that it's not exactly what I would call a seat full of support. This is probably one of the flattest seats that I've seen in the rear on, well, practically any vehicle. There is no side door pockets for the rear doors, but you do have a rear mount cup holder. And there is actually plenty of legroom underneath here. It's not, well, how do I put this? The one thing I do like about it is that when it comes to getting in, I've actually had issues with some other cars when it comes to the amount of ingress, egress for the rear doors, specifically cars like the Chevrolet Sonic in 5-door fashion. So that's something that you want to make sure that if the vehicle is going to be used fairly regularly, even for the smallest members of the family, that they're not getting into the way of the structure getting in and out. Now, if you take a look at the doors, cameraman, pull back, and I'll show you exactly what I mean. Well, you're going to notice something really interesting on the doors in the rear, and that has to do with the fact that they're manual. That's right. At the base level for the Mitsubishi Mirage, you don't have power windows on all 4 panes. What you've got is manual cranks in the rear. What I like about them is that they roll all the way down, so you definitely have the opportunity for Rover to wag his tongue out the window as much as he may want. But the nice thing too is that these are a very positive crank, I guess is the nicest way of explaining crank down windows. It does by no means feel loose, but I will caution that you want to make sure that just from sometimes road vibration, that sort of thing, that you may get them to come down just a slight little gap. So before you take it through the car wash, make sure that they're cinched up. Now let's tell you about the safety, because there's actually been some new safety marks that you need to know about, and it just doesn't affect the Mitsubishi Mirage. It actually affects practically every car in the Super Mini City Car class. Now, what we're talking about is the small overlap crash test, and that's where the vehicle is contacted right about here in mimicking a crash at about 40 miles an hour. Now, the reason they do that is because this is the type of crash event that can happen if somebody is maybe falling asleep or simply not paying attention and goes into the opposing lane. So it's definitely a horrific crash event. Now, when we talk about top safety picks from the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, well, top safety pick means that it performs the top level of good in a moderate overlap frontal test. Now that we've got the small one, and if they do well in that, then it gives them top safety pick plus. Here is the problem. practically every single car that they tested scored poor when it came to this type of test. And unfortunately, the Mitsubishi didn't do well in the small overlap. But it should be noted that the car that actually got the highest mark didn't get the highest possible mark, and that was a Chevrolet Spark, which scored the acceptable rating. Now, the thing that was on my mind when it came to the safety results for the Mitsubishi Mirage is how well it did with Euro NCAP, and that's the European New Car Assessment Program. Now, from their tests, which also include the use of a pole for side impact, it scored 4 out of 5 stars. And that's definitely respectable. That's the same score of the Nissan Versa Note in Europe, as well as the Nissan Micra in Europe, which actually is a 2010 design. Now, let's get things wrapped around the idea of, well, how you have to think about driving a city super mini class car. Best way I can explain it, drive these cars like you would ride a motorcycle. And by that I mean make sure that you're looking all around all the time when it comes to possible dangers. Well, we're just about done with this particular long-term Mitsubishi Mirage, and I've been kind of going through it, trying to come up with a mark, if you will. And I know some people like to do things like 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10, that sort of thing, but let me tell you the key things that you need to know when it comes to this particular city car. The powertrain is actually very surprising. And if you treat it the right way, and by the right way I mean if you drive it in the sense that you know when to coast and also when to upshift a little bit early, you can actually get the Transport Canada numbers that we see on the dealer sticker. So the fact is that if you drive it like you're, how do I put this nicely? If you drive it like you're really not wanting to get anywhere in a hurry, you will achieve the numbers. But what the other thing needs to be considered about when it comes to these cars is, can they get out of their own way? And this is something that I found with a lot of the other city cars and super minis, a lot of them can't. And this particular setup, no air conditioning, 895 kilograms with this 3-cylinder 5-speed, it actually is quite a peppy performer. So I like it for that purpose. If you're thinking about this car for commuter purposes and also making sure that you're going to be able to find that hole in traffic, it definitely should be on your list. I've driven the car with the CVT, and I have to admit, I'm not a fan. There's just something about that particular setup. It just simply doesn't seem to have enough power with this 3-cylinder engine for the CVT to work the way that I really like it. Now, the competitors, there's certainly a lot of manufacturers who are in this game now, and the one that is definitely causing a lot of concern is the Nissan Micra, going to be priced under $10,000. I don't think that's the car that all of these super minis need to worry about. The one that needs to be really worried about right now is the Volkswagen Up. There's too many indicators that this car is coming. And the Volkswagen Up is a 5-star performer with the European New Car Assessment Program, so it actually does better than the Mirage or the Versa Note or the coming Nissan Micra for Canada. I think we're going to see it, even though Volkswagen's being a little cagey right now on when exactly it might arrive. So for me, if I was looking for cheap wheels, I would probably just stick with this particular trim level. I've already talked to Mitsubishi about this a little bit, and I think that they should make available a dealer-installed air conditioning module for this car. I'm a little concerned as to how much power it actually could rob out of this 1.3. But if you want a little bit of creature comforts, that's about all that I would add to this particular trim package for the Mitsubishi Mirage. Now, if you've got thoughts, feelings, or questions about anything automotive, whether it be sub $13,000 cars, what's coming in the world of city cars, anything at all, send an email to steelbeltedmind@gmail.com. For the road trip, I'm Michael Clark. Keep the shiny side up and the rubber side down.
The opinions expressed on the program you have just watched are not necessarily those of Shaw Cable Systems or of this station. Through our access policy, we provide the opportunity for community groups and individuals to express their points of view.
Now, what I like about the interior of the Mitsubishi Mirage is that there's nothing below the line of sight. Your HVAC controls, audio controls, it's all up here on this beautiful central pod, piano black, and I have to admit, this is something that more manufacturers need to think about when it comes to where to put the shiny. And I'm going to show you here by simply plopping the navigation piece here. And the nice thing about it is it locks in place, and now you have a navigation screen where it should be. Not over here, not in front of you, and believe me, I've seen it, and simply not in the line of sight. I mean, you could mount everything here, your hula dancers, you name it. This is a really slick piece to have. Now, the other thing I want to point out is that the glove box is actually quite large. But what you've also got in here, and I'll admit, it took me a couple of months to find it, and that is the USB dongle here for hooking into your audio system. So you've got USB hookup, as well as auxiliary input jack and CD audio. Now, the wheel, simply because of the space in here, we do not have the ability for telescope, but we do have tilt. Now, there's actually a bit of a trip computer here, and it will give you the mileage figures in respect to average liters per 100 kilometers, trip meters, all that sort of thing. And here's some interesting news when it comes to economy, because it's one thing to talk about 97 kilometers an hour, Transport Canada, but that's not a speed that a lot of people are going to do when it comes to their efficiency. Now, I actually took this out on a very long highway run, averaging between 115 to 120 kilometers an hour. And I will tell you that it returns 7 liters per 100 kilometers, and that's pretty good for going that much beyond what the actual test speeds would be for determining what you see on the window sticker. Now, when it comes to the rest of the organization inside, the door panels do have your bottle holders up front. You do have an express down for the driver's side power window. There's power mirrors for left and right, but they should also probably think about adding heat to them. So, I mean, you've already got the power lead going there. Would it really kill you to actually put heated mirrors into the Mirage? Probably not. There is the intermittent wipers as well as an intermittent control for the rear wiper. The one thing I will point out is that there really isn't a lot of space here between the passenger and the driver. There's no fold-down armrests, so, well, you definitely want to be traveling with someone you like. The other thing that I needed to point out is that the seat material on this particular long-term tester, sometimes when we get into these types of vehicles after about 4,000, 5,000 kilometers, especially with my Heine, things start moving around in respect to the upholstery. And the good news is that we haven't encountered that at all with this particular Mitsubishi Mirage. This is definitely hard wearing. And I should also point out that even for a base seat without any form of additional lumbar support, it actually has good lumbar to begin with, and it certainly hasn't felt like it's collapsed over the last few months. The other thing that needs to be pointed out, needs to be added immediately as far as I'm concerned, is that they need to put a manual height adjustment lever onto the driver's side seat. This doesn't have it, and as we'll point out with Bigger Brian, even without his winter gear on that you saw in a previous episode, still kind of tight to fit him inside this particular Mitsubishi Mirage. Now, the front mat for the driver is held in place. It does have easy clips that lock it into place, so you're not going to have to worry about that mat bunching up underneath the pedals in any way, shape, or form. The rest of the interior, well, we're dealing with, of course, hard plastics, but I will say that the fit and finish and the trim, everything else inside is actually quite good for a car of this caliber. The one thing I do over the winter months is I take the dash-mounted HVAC vents and I position them to the side glass. Helps a little bit. There is dedicated defroster vents, but at the same time, they're, well, I'm not saying we need frost shields, but it's nice to articulate these particular vents to get a little bit more air onto the glass. Well, welcome to Inside the Mitsubishi Mirage, and we're joined by Brian Park. And if you're wondering who he is, well, he's the guy who's usually behind the camera here for the road trip. Brian, thanks for joining us inside the Mitsubishi Mirage.
Thanks for having me.
Now, Brian, the reason I got you here is that you are a bona fide car guy. You put together cars that really a lot of people should leave alone.
I wouldn't necessarily say that.
Okay,
but
he fixes Saturns on a daily basis. Well, let's not get into, because then he's going to start talking about the stupid stuff I do, and believe me, the list is long and distinguished. But what I wanted to do is get your perspective on a car like this. Now let's say you got $12,498, and let's say you're going to be doing a fairly healthy commute on a daily basis, like maybe 100, 150 kilometers there and back, all the time. Now, something like this, what I wanted to get your perspective from is, do you think this is a car that would be on your list?
oh, definitely would be on our list. On the list, it's it's the bottom of the price point.
Absolutely.
So it gets a place right there on that, because you're going to be looking at the most economically running one. You're going to be looking at the most lowest price to buy. Those are definitely going to be cars on your list, and this one is at the bottom price point, so it's going to be on the list.
Now, the thing that we were also taking a look at when it comes to this car is the warranty. Now, in Canada, Mitsubishi has a 10-year, 160,000 kilometer powertrain warranty, 5-year, 100,000 for essentially comprehensive. Now, do you think that's going to be a major selling factor that people should be thinking about when they're looking at a car in this class?
Definitely. Just with any newer car now, it's getting so much harder for the average guy to do any kind of repairs on his own in his own garage anymore. Everything's got to go back to the dealer, and having that factory warranty where you can just take it to the dealer to have your problems handled is just great.
Now, let me ask you, having taken a look underneath the hood of this Mitsubishi Mirage, would you say this is an overly complicated powertrain? Is this something that you feel is not going to have as many issues for servicing as, say, something a little more technologically laden?
Looking under the hood of this thing, compared to like most other newer cars that I've been looking at lately, it's like super user-friendly under there.
Well, that's good.
No.
Now, the other thing, too, we need to think about is the car equipped properly? Now, $12,498, that's no AC. It doesn't give us a lot in the way of options. And what I was going to ask you, from your perspective as a commuter, what do you think needs to be here as standard equipment to really get their attention?
Number one, it needs cruise control.
Okay. Cruise would be nice. We got a naked steering wheel here just waiting for it.
If you're going to have any kind of commuter car that, they're advertising, great highway mileage, this is what you need to get to work and back. You're spending a lot of time on the highway, anybody knows. Especially in Manitoba, cruise control.
Now, the other thing that's also very important for Canadian customers is heated exterior mirrors. Now, we've got power exterior mirrors on this Mitsubishi Mirage, but you and I both know that once you got the power there, it's not too hard to make them heated.
Well, you got the power already there. You have the rear defrost already in place. You're 3/4 of the way there.
In fact, it could be the type of thing where you actually do engage the heated exterior mirrors, much like you do on a Honda product, by pressing the electric defrost.
Most of them, that's the way it is now.
Well, that's definitely something we would like to see happen. Now, I got to ask you, for the 6'4"-ish guy that you are, interior comfort. You're definitely not skidding on the headliner like you sometimes do on other cars.
Tons of headroom in this thing, and actually not too bad on legroom.
That's definitely impressive, because I know sometimes we practically got to fold you to get you inside some of the stuff. Now, the other thing, too, is they don't have an air conditioning module for this car yet. I'm thinking it might be something that they need to add at the dealer level. What's your thoughts?
Definitely a great idea. Our Manitoba weather swings pretty wild here.
Oh, yes.
40 below to 40 above. Stuck in traffic on a hot day. You're not overly worried about how much horsepower that thing's sucking. You're just concerned about staying cool.
Now, the other thing I was going to ask you, too, is that there's other cars in the price class. In fact, like a car like a Nissan Versa sedan, $11,898. In this type of price class, what's more important for practicality? Do you think it really has to be ruled by hatchback, or do you think sedans even have a chance?
I think it's going to be ruled by the hatchback class.
Definitely.
It's just so much more versatile in a small unit like this to have that, big opening on the back so you can actually get something in the back.
Well, it's something that we're seeing a lot more going on. Now, do you think that now that we got a car that's in Canada for $9,998 coming, the 2015 Nissan Micra, do you think they got to start thinking about adjusting their price on this, or maybe they could somehow offset it by putting in more equipment?
It's going to be up to the individual thing too, because there's, when it gets into these little cars, there's a lot of styling things that people like as well.
That's
it's not
true.
always about, the price becomes pretty marginal when it's within a few $1,000s.
Well, it's definitely going to be a factor, and we're going to keep our eyes on it, of course, and see exactly how well this car does in Canada, as well as the coming ones when it comes to commuter pieces. But very good perspectives. And now, folks, remember that if you've got thoughts, feelings, or questions about anything automotive, you can send an email to the road trip at steelbeltedmind@gmail.com. I might even tell this guy what you said. I'm Michael Clark.
I'm Brian Park,
Keep the shiny side up.
and the rubber on the road.
No, it's the rubber side down.
Oh, rubber side down? Well, you meant something.
Oh, just forget it.